So moving on to the next part, the next lecture on removable partial denture, that is on minor connectors, right? So we studied major connectors. Now the second part is the minor connectors. So if you want, or if I want to define what are actually minor connectors, so yes, minor connectors are what? Minor connectors are nothing but a connecting link between the base of a removable partial denture or other units of the prosthesis. Okay, so it is a connecting link between the major connectors and other parts of the removable partial denture. So if on one side I am writing major connector, on the other side I'll write other parts. Okay, so the connecting link between those two is your minor connector. Major connector was what? It was connecting link between parts of one side of the RPD with the other side. Now if I talk particularly of one side, so between that major connector and the other part there is one part that is called minor connector. Okay, so if I talk again, or if we revise the definition, it is what? It is a connecting link between the major connector or the base of RPD and with the other units of the prosthesis like your clasp, your indirect retainer or your occlusal rest. So anything which is connecting your clasp, the indirect retainer or occlusal rest with the major connector is called minor connector. Sorry, yeah. So when we talk about functions of minor connector, so it connects the major connectors with the other parts like clasp, rest, indirect retainer, denture base first. Okay, the definition itself becomes the first function. Then it transmits the stresses evenly to all the components. So whatever the stresses are there will be first concentrated in the major component and then it will be distributed to other components through that minor connector. Okay, so that transmits the stress evenly to all the components so that there is no concentration of load at any single point. When there is concentration of load at any single point, it causes breakage or harmful effects on that part of the RPD or its associated structure. Correct? So for forces to be distributed evenly, we put minor connectors so that it dissipates the forces in all the directions. Okay, apart from that, it also transmits the forces acting on the prosthesis to the edentulous ridge and the remaining natural teeth. So not only it divides the forces to other parts or other components of RPD, but it also transmits the forces to the edentulous ridge and the remaining natural teeth. So that three-dimensionally, if you see, everything goes on simultaneously. The forces are distributed well in all the areas. That are the three main functions of your minor connector. First, it forms a connection. Second, forces to other parts, and third, also transmits the forces to the edentulous ridge as well as the natural teeth. There are different types of minor connectors. So if we talk about the minor connector, there are four types. First, which joins the clasp with major connector. Second, which joins the indirect retainer or the rest with major connector. Third, which joins denture base with major connector, and fourth is approach arm in bar type clasp. So we discussed, right, the minor connector are what? They are a connecting link between major connector and other parts like your clasp, indirect retainer, rest and denture base. Similarly, based on these four different parts, you have four types of connectors. One which joins the clasp to major connector, one which joins the indirect retainer to major connector, one which joins the denture base to major connector, and fourth, approach arm in bar type clasp. So now when we talk about the first type, which joins the clasp with the major connector, so the name itself is saying it connects the clasp assembly to the major connector, usually located on the proximal surface of the abutment. So if this is your abutment teeth, okay, on the proximal surface over here, if you see, this is the minor connector over here, which is connecting this major connector with the clasp assembly. Okay, if you see buccolingual section, So lingually they are broad because we have wider lingual embrasures than the narrower labial embrasures, right? So it is wider lingually and narrower labially, or you can say thickest in the lingual area and thinnest in the buccal area. We need to avoid the bulkiness as much as possible so that tongue is not interfered. Okay, it should be rigid enough so that all the forces are well tolerated, and it provides good support. It prevents the vertical tissueward movement because it is attached to the rest. Rest causes that stop, and the minor connector also is attached to the rest like this. So whenever the RPD is moving, they will move together. So if rest is also having that vertical stop, the minor connector will also have that vertical stop. If they are not able to be given adjacent to the edentulous space, you can give between two teeth as a in the embrasure area. Okay, so it aids in aesthetic arrangement of teeth also. Sometimes you might not have space to keep that minor connector with your artificial teeth. In that case, you shift to the adjacent side where you have embrasure, where you can give an embrasure rest assembly with a clasp and a minor connector. So that is also feasible. So these were the first type of minor connector, which connects the clasp with the major connector. Second, it connects the rest with the major connector or indirect retainer with the major connector. Suppose you have given this indirect retainer on the distal triangular fossa of the premolar 1, right, and there is a thin metal extension going downward connecting to your major connector. It should cross at 90 degree, first thing. Secondly, this connection is called second type of minor connector, where it is this minor connector over here is connecting your indirect retainer with the major connector. It is mainly designed to fit in the embrasure space only. Proximal plate, if we are giving, it will be given along the guiding planes. Ultimately, all the undercuts or whatever are present should be removed so that you can keep a straight minor connector which is at 90 degree without any interference. The third type is that joins the denture base with the major connector, right? So anything, your RPD will also have some part of your denture base, that is your acrylic part on the labial or buccal side. That connection between your acrylic and the metal is called one type of connector, and that is called minor connector. If we see the requirements, they should be rigid enough, they should allow proper arrangement of natural teeth, maximum distal extension should be up to the maxillary tuberosities for maxilla, and mandibular distal extension up to 2/3 of the edentulous ridge. Okay, how do you prepare this? You prepare tissue stoppers so that you have good amount of space between your metal framework. Between this metal framework, all your acrylic will come. Now when this acrylic will come, it will create a joint between your metal as well as the acrylic, and that forms your minor connector. Now based on that, you have finish lines. One tissue stoppers can be added and the last also, right? So when you add all this, you get this space. What are finish lines? Finish lines are the butt joint or the junction of acrylic, denture base and major connector. Wherever the acrylic and your denture, that is your, the denture base as well as the metal part is connecting or forming a joint, that is called a type of minor connector, but that in terminology precisely is called finish line. That finish line is divided into two: internal finish line and external finish line. So if the space between the metal framework and the tissue surface of the cast is provided by adding relief wax on the edentulous master cast, over here the way I explained, this is your metal bar, and with another color, if I draw over here, this space will be taken up by the acrylic. So this junction formed by the metal and the acrylic will called as internal finish line. Now after seeing the diagram, we'll study the definition. It is a space between the metal framework and the tissue surface of the cast. Okay, and it is, how do you provide that space? By adding a layer of wax, so that when you cast that framework, there is some amount of space between the framework and the tissue surface. that forms a ledge. When the acrylic is going to go in that space, it forms a ledge or a margin, okay, and that should be sharp and definite, and that is called as internal finish line. Similarly, outside, not below the teeth but somewhere outside, over here, if this is your metal part, major connector, and then you have your denture base over here like this is your joining your clasp assembly with major connector. So here this is all your denture base, this is your major connector. So this junction formed externally, not inside, not below the framework, it is outside, you can see it. So the junction between the acrylic and the exposed metal on the external or polished surface, this is on internal surface, this is on external surface. So any junction formed between the acrylic and the metal framework on the external surface is called external finish line. That should be less than 90 degree and it should be a butt joint. What is butt joint? This is called as butt joint. It should be in flush. Okay, so that is called as internal and external finish lines. So now if I show you a cumulative diagram, external finish lines will be seen outside, internal finish lines will be seen inside. Now based on that, you have different types of denture based designs. First is your lattice, where you have this longitudinal and transverse extensions. The longitudinal is 16 gauge and the transverse one is 12 gauge thickness. For every teeth you keep one space in between, right? So there are two struts, they are called struts, longitudinal and transverse struts. In the same way, you have meshwork kind of denture base, where a sheet of metal with some small minute holes are present. This can be used where you want to place multiple teeth and attachment of acrylic is a bit weaker than that of lattice. Here the acrylic goes in and out all around this denture base part, I mean the major connector part, and then it gets interlocked, whereas over here the interlocking is less. The third is a bead wire or nail head. So on your ridge, your metal framework will have this bead or extensions. In this extensions, the acrylic will go and get entangled, and over here your teeth will be present. So retention is obtained through the small projections from your framework. It is indicated mostly in tooth supported dentures, okay, where we have a well healed ridge and you don't want to do a frequent relining. It has a good soft tissue response, more hygienic, but the attachment is again is question mark. It is a weaker attachment between the acrylic and the metal. So based on your third type, that is minor connector that joins the major connector with the denture base. So there are three types, okay, mesh, lattice or bead wire or nail head type. Based on that connection with the metal and acrylic, we have two finish lines, that is the internal and external finish lines, okay. Then minor connector that serves as an approach arm for bar type clasp. Now when we'll study direct retainer, we have I bar, Y bar, all type of bar type clasp, where the approach arm goes gingivally first, it turns upwards and goes occlusally. So this junction between the denture base and this metal clasp assembly is also a type of retainer. This minor connector also acts as a clasp assembly because it helps to position the retentive tip of the clasp or the gingivally approaching clasp more properly. It is not so rigid, so not so strong, and should have a limited amount of flexibility so that that retention or that adaptability is maintained, and wherever there is soft tissue undercuts you cannot use. So ultimately I bar type of clasp cannot be used in soft tissue undercuts. This kind of connector also you will not see in soft tissue undercuts. This is specially for bar type of clasp, where the arm of the clasp approaches from the denture base, goes down, comes up and to the teeth. So that junction between the metal and denture base also is a minor connector. So this was all about your different minor connectors. A very short topic sometimes comes as a 5 marker, so you need to write it briefly and cut short it down with proper diagrams so that you don't waste much time on these answers, and these are actually scoring topics which are very easy and which can be done very quickly. Still, if you guys have any doubt, you can contact me through any social media platform. We'll be happy enough to solve your queries, and thank you so much for your valuable time. See you in the next lecture.